I'm Melissa McKay. I am a developer advocate for JFrog, and I've been a developer for many years prior to this position. So I'm super interested in all things developer side, developer oriented, especially when it comes down to our processes and keeping up efficiency with our project.
Yeah, and my name is Damian Curry. I'm the technical director for the community and alliances team at NGINX, and I come from the other side of the house. I was a sysadmin and a DevOps and SRE and whatever name you want to put to it. And I've always been super interested in automation and just, as I always say, being lazy. I want to do something once and reuse it and not have to touch it again. So that's why I love doing this sort of work and figuring out ways that we can make our infrastructure more reliable.
So we have come together, the powers of NGINX and JFrog, to come up with this demo where we can just show real life the issues that developers come across. And by the time we get to deploying this application we've worked on so hard, all of the decisions that we need to make up into that point. So this is going to be a really good test of reality here. We've talked about doing this for a while, so I'm excited to get this kicked off and done. And the very first thing I want to discuss is planning. In fact, that's the title of this episode, the one where we planned.
The stuff that everybody tries to get out of and just start working and start hammering out code, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's very easy to skip this part, even though it's super important just to get to doing. But there's a couple reasons we need to stop for a moment and figure this out, because the first major one is you and I are working asynchronously, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're both in our own separate time zones even. We're going to be working on this, so we need to keep ourselves organized.
Yep.
We also
hopefully break it up so that we can pawn some of this work off on other people too, and it's not just the two of us fixing everything.
Yes, exactly. And we also need to make this visible too. There's some other folks in both of our organizations that are interested in taking a look at this. And to avoid a lot of the "are you done yet? Are you done yet?" conversations, we need a good tool that will help us make our work visible and make it apparent how far we've gotten and how far we have yet to go.
Yeah. I'll use air quotes around good there. I'm not sure if there are anyone.
Right.
I feel like this is always the endless fight of, well, let's use this tool. No, I hate that tool. Let's use that tool. Somebody else obviously hates that one too. So
yeah, exactly. So I believe that the tool should work for you. We shouldn't be struggling trying to get a tool to work for us. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about just a little bit of the bare minimums of what we need this tool for.
Yeah.
I'll start with the first one. I just need somewhere I can put my tasks, and I can move the tasks to started, done. At the very least, that's what I want.
Yeah, that's usually the bare minimum. Is where is there somewhere that, is easily accessible so that, we can share access with other people if we get somebody else to come in and join in on the project. And also just so that, hopefully it's not something either of us have to maintain. I don't really feel like, being the one being like, oh, sorry, my AWS instance crashed and I lost all of our progress. So let's start from scratch. So hopefully we'll probably end up with something that's SaaS, maybe something that we already have access to. I know that's always one of the big decisions in companies is, well, don't really necessarily like this tool, but it's there and I can use it and I don't have to worry about making that call or signing that contract or what have you.
Exactly. Next thing I want is just something simple. I don't want it to be so complex that I have to spend a week learning how to use the tool just to get my tasks put in.
Yeah, that's another big one. It always kind of makes me laugh when everybody talks about agile and then they have this very strict process. I'm like, I think you missed part of the idea behind this.
Right. It's a not agile process.
Yeah. And again, we're not doing anything super big, but being able to just have that, I'm usually such an anti-GUI person and spend so much time in the command line. But it's so nice just to be able to drag something over and go, no, I'm done with this now. I don't want to have to open it up and click through 5 menus and close it and resolve it. I just want to drag it over and put it in that list so I can feel slightly better about myself.
Yes. That's another thing. I like something that it's really easy for a particular task that I can attach documentation to or make comments on or have conversations with people about, because that's the history of what happened with that task and a history of why you made the decisions you did to get that task into the done column.
Yeah. Yeah. There is so much of that tends to get lost into the ether that can be so nice to look back and go, oh, yeah, I knew I had a reason for making that decision, but I can't remember what it is.
Yeah. Lastly, I want a tool that will let me plan. Like, I'm glad you brought up Agile earlier, because I like working in this sprint style where you choose, either a week or 2 weeks where you plan some work, you plan some tasks you want to get done, and that's what you focus on during the week. That way you can still have your running to-do list, because you're always going to come up with more stuff. I mean, that's part of Agile, right? Yeah. Sometimes you need to redirect, or there's a bunch of work that you just didn't think about until too late sometimes, but things that you need to add to your to-do list. So I want to be able to still be able to add to that list, but have the focus on a particular week or sprint, that kind of thing.
Yeah, especially because it's not like, sadly, this isn't our full-time job doing this one, or else it would probably be a lot easier. But yeah, it's trying to schedule it. It's like, oh, the last thing you want is go, oh, great, I've got like 2 hours in between meetings. And then you go through and you go, well, what was I working on last? And being able to just go, oh yeah, there it is. I know what I got to go do right now.
Yep. Well, since I care about this so much, I'm going to go off and research a few of them. Some of the names that I can think of off the top of my head, there's Asana, there's Trello, there's Jira, there's Rike, there's one called Basecamp. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I haven't heard that one. One that we were trying to use, but sadly IT blocked us, was what is it, Monday?
Monday. Yeah.
It's nice and simple. And, I tried to use that for my personal stuff, but I couldn't quite convince my wife that we need a planning system, but
Right. So something very low tech that I have at home is index cards.
Yeah.
and a board that I just pin them to. And that works really well too. Since we both need to see it, we should look for something that's online.
Sadly, that doesn't virtualize as well, but it's
yeah. Okay, I'll go out, find a couple. I'm looking for simplicity, so I'm probably going to land on something as simple as possible that does the job for what we defined as important to us.
Yep. Keep it simple. It's always the better way to go.
Okay, so we're going to write a bunch of code. Where are we going to put it? We need source control. We can't just go off and try to combine shell scripts later. That's not going to work very well.
Yeah. And, the other thing with this is we want to make sure that anybody can access it, right? We don't want to put this in some hidden private repo. This is something that we want to be out in the world and, get everybody else's feedback and hopefully get other people contributing, maybe obviously not at the beginning, but, once it's out there, we're just kind of coming up with ideas on our own here. We know we don't hit every use case. So, I mean, to me, it's always just kind of the no-brainer of like, well, GitHub is where the traffic is, right? And that's always a plus there. And I feel like it is the default place where everybody goes now. Yeah,
I think that's a good plan. We can stick with GitHub. Pretty easy for the community too to participate if it's on GitHub. Plus, you get the added benefit of like being able to add issues, open up discussions, things like that on the project, which would be pretty valuable.
Yeah, that's the great one too, especially after we, get something out there for people to play with. Hopefully we'll get people coming in and, go on, why the hell did you do it this way? Or, it would be really cool. And that's where it gets really fun.
Yep.
And hey, also worst case scenario, it's always in Git, so we can always move it to GitLab or Git whatever comes next if necessary. But I think GitHub will be a good home for it.
Yep, I agree. Okay, so I have an application in mind because for this particular demo that we're working on together, I don't want to start from scratch. I just want to get an application that we're both interested in, that we want to make updates to. We want to explore these processes that a developer goes through and setting it up initially, setting up all of the development environment, the CI/CD, all of that stuff. And I have one in mind It's one I've used in the past,
Hmm.
and it's pretty popular in the Java world.
Oh, great.
That's my background, so I'm biased. Um, it is called the Spring Pet Clinic application. Um, this is a application. It's been around a while. There's a lot of forks that have been made from this application, demonstrating various features, various capabilities. It is Spring Boot, so that's another reason I wanted to use it. Makes it very simple for us. There is a particular fork that has split it up into microservices, and that's something
Okay.
that I want to explore because I think that is a pretty common scenario that we run into these days. We have different services. They all need to be able to communicate with each other. They may be developed by different teams. They may even be completely different languages. So these are all things that I want to leave open for, the community to give us an idea of, what would be useful in
Yeah.
that scenario.
Yeah. And it also gives us more opportunities to, explore different ways that you make these changes and how you roll them out, and, how you make sure that, when you do roll them out, you're doing it carefully. So you're like, oh, I was just messing with the message service. I didn't think that would crash this other service over here. And it's, everybody loves to talk about microservices nowadays. And it's also really good to, think about it as, it's not a requirement, right? Everybody thinks they got to do it, but there's always good times where or good reasons to keep certain services close together. But chances are people are running microservices to a certain extent, right? There's maybe not thousands of them in their environment like some, but chances are you've got some sort of shared service between your different applications these days.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that kind of flows into one of our topics. There's a database that you get to choose from in this particular application. The choices are MySQL, Postgres, and then there's by default, it will use an in-memory H2 database. So that's a good example of a shared resource
Yeah.
we're going to need to
Yeah.
consider.
Yeah. And it's always one of those interesting things. I know I've, painted myself in the corner in the past with it too, where you go, oh, well, I've got this built-in memory database. We're not getting a ton of traffic. It's not huge. Just, yeah, that's fine. And then all of a sudden you realize why you don't want to push that into production. And then a lot of times you run into things where even if it's, SQL compliant or, is meant to mimic these more full-fledged databases, it's not always the smoothest transition to the standalone database. So that's always something good to kind of keep in the back of your head when you're working on this. I can't tell you the amount of times that, when I was running infrastructure and somebody would go, do a deployment, it doesn't work. And they go, well, it worked in my dev environment. And it's like, well, yeah, your dev environment isn't quite production. So it's good to, try to also do what we can to keep those development environments as close to real world as we can, just to cut down on everybody's headaches.
Yes, exactly. I've had some of those same pains as well in the past. Yeah, it's really embarrassing when, your in-memory database works just fine in your dev environment, but you go to, deploy into production and you realize, oh, the column data type is just a little bit off.
Yeah. Because it's never it's never a huge problem, right? It's always this one little tiny thing where it's like, oh, it's, a hex character off. And you're like, oh man, those are the fun ones to try to find.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's another thing we'll need to consider is not only our development environments, but perhaps an intermediary test environment where we can, test our features, test whether bugs have been fixed. Yeah, that's something we need.
Yeah, and hopefully get it set up so we've got at least a certain gating. So I know it's pretty common a lot of times to have some sort of CD platform that's watching your Git repo, and if a commit comes into the specific branch or some I've done in the past where you kind of gate it just because there's a lot of changes and you don't want to be stepping, because I've also had that where you end up in the endless loop of, okay, we've got 20 different environments that they're trying to build, but they all tried to build at once, so now they're all stuck. So it's always good to keep the fine line on that one too. But yeah, having those automated builds just to rule out that, well, it worked on my laptop, right?
Right. Yeah, that brings me to a couple more items that we need to talk about. One is dealing with our artifacts that we're going to be producing. So this particular project, we're going to be using containers, Docker containers. So we're going to need to be able to work with those Docker containers. That means I am probably going to be installing Docker Desktop. I know there's lots of opinions about that lately.
Yeah. And everybody, has opinions when features start getting put behind paywalls, but somebody's got to pay our salaries. I try to stay out of it. And, I run Docker Desktop mostly just, I very rarely interact with the desktop part of it, but it's approved by our IT department. That's a big thing. You always have to keep in mind, you never, there's a lot of times you go, oh, the tool I'd love to use is this, but IT will kill me if I install that on my laptop. So it's better to, stay within the rules too.
Right. Yeah. This is going to be, it's very dependent on your team, what the requirements are, what your organization requires, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I like Docker Desktop just because it's super easy to use on my Mac, on my development machine. I know there's a lot of folks that prefer using tools like Builda or Podman. My struggle with those is just ease of use, in development environments on Mac or Windows. Those you really need a Linux environment to be comfortable.
A lot of those, and I've tried and broken my own Mac laptops many times going, well, I know how to run this on my Linux box over here. I bet you I can make it work on my laptop. And then I'm re-imaging all of a sudden. So it's fun to play with, but a lot of times, unless it's a full Linux box, I always just end up getting myself in trouble.
Yeah. Makes sense. What else? Oh, well, obviously we're going to be coming out with, other artifacts that are Java based. I, of course, use Artifactory, considering where I work. It's really interesting because back when I was a developer, before I even knew about JFrog, I actually knew the name Artifactory and I didn't know the name JFrog. So I love putting those together now, making sure people know that's a JFrog product. Mm-hmm. But before, I didn't really know all the bells and whistles, what it can actually do for you. I just viewed it as a developer as pure storage, and that was it. So I didn't see the value. Like, why would you, buy a license for something like that? Why would you use that? It seems like a lot of extra for, something I could easily just set up on a server, a shared server, for storage. Turns out there's a lot of extra things you can do. And there's some protections you can put in place now, since everyone's worried about security, worried about pulling in libraries that are out of date, or vulnerabilities have been discovered, that kind of stuff. So this is what JFrog prides itself in, is trying to make that process as painless as possible for developers. So I think for this project, I'd love to set up a cloud version. We do have like a trial version that has commercial features. Let's see how far we can get with that. And try it out. Yeah,
it's always good to start with that. And it's and you, like you said, managing all those different dependencies and packages. I think the one that you forgot is it also is getting you a cached copy, where in case somebody decides to go and pull their NPM packages off the internet and cause all sorts of havoc on different websites you never thought would have had an issue. So that's definitely another one of those little extra safeguard where that you have access and quick access to the different pieces you need to actually make this build.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was another thing I took for granted as a developer. There's been a few times when I've been behind a firewall, so my only option was to use, a URL that was provided by our operations department. And it turns out our URL was going through Artifactory. But if you don't have that type of protection, the default behavior for a development environment is to go directly out to the public repos and pull directly from there. If you have 500 developers and they're all doing this at once, I think we saw situations with Docker Hub, right, where they started, throttling that down. One IP can't be asking for the same package over and over and over again. It's just irresponsible use of bandwidth.
Well, it's also hard to tell, in those situations which traffic is legitimate and which is malicious, because it very well could.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, is this somebody who's trying to DDoS me, or is this just somebody who got a bunch of developers working on a new project all at the same time and they're all trying to grab the same things?
Exactly. Yeah. When that got put in place with Docker Hub, I knew there was going to be a lot of upset around that, but also understood, you have to do this.
Yeah.
As an organization, you have to protect yourself from attacks like that.
And bandwidth still costs money in these days. It's one of those funny things that you kind of forget about on the internet. You're like, oh yeah, somebody's paying for that. It doesn't matter, who it is. It may not be you, but somebody paid for that storage and the bandwidth to send it to you.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Next in the process, we need to talk about build servers. We need something. You mentioned automatically building already.
Yeah.
We're going to need to come down on a decision what we want to do there.
Yeah. Which is, there's a lot of different options. I mean, for example, in one of our projects that we'll talk about in a little bit, we, had this exact same conversation where we're sitting there going, well, we need to test this build process. We want to do it automatically. And we started looking at all the different tools. And, to tell you the truth, we ended up going with Jenkins just because it was the one tool that everybody on the team was like, oh yeah, like it's been a while, but I can probably remember it. Right.
Right.
It's not the best. It drives me up the wall constantly, but for what we needed and the group of people we had, it did the job. So still looking for an excuse to get rid of it, but for the time being in that project, it works just fine. And especially because we're very much focused on infrastructure, the job that it's running is super straightforward. So it's not really taking account of all the cool stuff you can do in other CD platforms that are a little bit more modern.
Yeah. Yes. I've used Jenkins too in the past. It has a huge community behind it. So I totally get why.
That's always one of the big ones. As much as we were looking at actually, like Circle CI and oh man, there's a bunch of other ones. Obviously we worked at JFrog and the different stuff that you can do there. But as much as I love the JFrog stuff, we just were like, well, that'd be great, but we're not really writing an application. It just didn't quite really fit that time. But hey, this time we're doing something a little different.
Right. Yeah. This will be interesting. I want to try out JFrog pipelines. I think it's a good opportunity to try it out, see how it does. A lot of that you'll recognize as familiar YAML for writing pipelines, but again, this is a decision that you would make based on your team skill set. I have also felt the pain of a decree coming from on high telling us what build server we need to use. And since all of us were new to it, it was rather painful getting up to speed. And we actually did some pretty dangerous things with it, unsafe ways of using it that we didn't realize until later. But that's the other risk you take when you start with a brand new tool.
That is always something you got to worry about. And, sadly, most of the time you don't even get a choice unless you're at a startup or something. Chances are it's going to go, nope, that's our build server. That's what you get to use.
Yeah. So that's something that I want to keep in mind throughout this demo and creating this demo in this project is making sure that we are thoughtful that not everyone's going to use the same tool. So when we see like glue code being built to only work with a specific tool, we need to really highlight that and maybe make a different decision there. Yeah,
I think that's a great call out, because one of the big things that I really want to get out of this, it's as much as we're here and we work for NGINX and for JFrog, it's more about getting the concepts out there. And my whole team's sick of me, but we keep yelling about we're talking about protocols, not products, right? You never know what tool you're going to have to use or be forced to use or no longer be able to use, because that's one of the worst ones that I've run into, where it's not somebody came in and said, oh, here, you have to start using this tool. Instead, they just came in and said, you can never touch X again. And you're going, oh, okay, now I gotta re-architect all of this. So keeping that in mind and just having that thought process of like, hey, this isn't permanent. Chances are big pieces of this are going to change, and having that mindset when you get from the get-go, you always end up in a better place when you go back and you have to make those changes because you were conscious of it. You weren't just going, oh, I can just duct tape and use this special, whatever proprietary tool here that totally solves my problem. And then you have to move and realize you have no idea how the hell any of that worked.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, lastly, let's talk about deployment. This is a part that I don't get or haven't in the past had the opportunity to do a whole lot because most of my work was on the front end of things developing. When it comes to actual deployment, now we've got to make some decisions. What infrastructure are we going to use?
Yeah. And, just so that we can, keep up and be one of the cool kids, right? I guess we got to do it with Kubernetes because that's what everybody loves. And, I'm mostly just joking there. It's a great tool because, again, the reason that I'm a fan of Kubernetes is it's more of the mindset. It's a standard protocol. It's just trying to obscure away the things that you don't need to care about when you're doing the deployments. Obviously, all the underpinnings and things that are running underneath Kubernetes are super important, but that's only for the folks like me who are running it or, maintaining it or just love to nerd out about it. When it comes to the developers and the end users, they just want to make sure that they can deploy quickly and have resiliency and all that stuff. So that's where, in my mind, and especially, like you said, when we were talking about earlier, it allows you to have development environments that are so much closer to what you're actually going to be running in production, so that it just cuts down that one other headache of going, oh man, I thought I was done, and then this happened. So I just feel like it's the no-brainer. And, we've also got some other projects we've worked on that are all around this stuff.
Well, I'm super excited to get to that point. I think we'll have a lot to talk about when we get to that. And then deciding, do we want to use like a big cloud provider? Are there smaller organizations we could work with that might make this easier on us?
Yeah. And that's
really curious.
Yeah, that's always a great thing because, obviously it's just, oh yeah, we'll just spin it up in AWS. We'll just spin up an EKS cluster that takes all that out of my hands. I don't have to worry about it. And then you run an EKS cluster for a couple months and you get, your boss knocking on your door asking what the hell you're doing. And, and I've always been a big fan of DigitalOcean. They're kind of one of those smaller cloud providers. I mean, I've been messing with them since back when it was, VPSs. They weren't even cloud. It was the virtual private servers that you had to get provisioned in advance. So they've since gone in and are full cloud, but they're one of the reasons I really like DigitalOcean is because they're, I don't want to say dumbed down, but they don't worry about the things that large corporations want. Right. They're very much more focused on hobbyists. It's where most of my friends who work in the industry, that's where they run all of their own stuff. Right. It's simple. It's inexpensive. I mean, it's downright cheap compared to some of the other providers. And you don't have all the features, but also you've just got the basic functionality and it just works. We have our other project of reference architecture that kind of started this whole conversation where we did the same thing we're trying to do here, except starting at the bottom, going up. And we're looking at, me and some of my teammates looking back at all the environments we had built and automated in the past and went, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. I bet we could do that better now. And we did. We just sat down and we we're just like, okay, let's build out an environment that will just stand up Kubernetes, but not just Kubernetes, all of the other ancillary tools that everybody forgets about. I think we were saying it's kind of like an iceberg, right? You see your application and you think, man, that's the complicated part. And then underneath the water is all of your logging and your metrics and your, security and your networking stuff. So we really wanted to, number one, highlight that it's a complicated thing, but also to give people an example framework of, hey, this isn't something you're going to copy and put into production, but hopefully it connects some dots for you and shows like, oh, that's how you chain all of these different services together, and oh, that's how you handled that fault tolerance for race conditions when API is coming up or something like that. And, it was a lot of fun doing it. And, one of the things we spent a lot of time, integrating with AWS and have great support there. But when we started doing it on DigitalOcean, it was, I almost couldn't believe it because we swapped out what took in AWS, 4 big configs with all this different stuff. It's maybe like 30 lines. It's just nothing. And
Wow.
you just go build me a Kubernetes cluster. And it's also been in our test suite, as we mentioned before, is probably one of the most consistent at, it when it starts, it starts and it just works. A lot of the other ones you have failed or build failures, nothing from the code, but just because, maybe the components came up slightly out of order and AWS tears them down because it wasn't working right. And so that's one of the things that, we kind of I wanted to replicate that and show it from the same side, kind of top down, and how you then take that environment and then how do you plug an application into it? And then how do you do these more complex, updates and rollouts and, take advantage of all of those cool features that your CD platform may give you and you didn't realize were there, or even just didn't think like, oh yeah, I guess I could have this feedback loop where my environment sending data back to my CD cluster to do automated like blue-green rollouts or just tiered rollouts so it can, automatically move traffic over to the new environment and keep the old one up, and gives you a safe rollback plan and all that fun stuff that lets you feel brave enough to do the constant changes and push out those changes all the time, knowing that you're not going to break it. You're not going to break the internet, right?
Right. Yeah. These are things I'm interested in, especially in the blue-green rollouts, things like that. Enabling developers to go ahead and push out the latest and greatest. Heaven forbid there's a problem, there is the ability to roll back if you need to. I know that's a disappointment when that happens, but it does happen sometimes. For things beyond your control. Yeah.
We're all only human. We're all going to make mistakes from time to time, right? And if it becomes a lot less painful when like when you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I can make a mistake because I know that I have this system in place and it will, cover up for me.
Yes. Well, this series we're doing together, we're going to see a lot of these mistakes. We're going to show them live. It's going to be great because I really, really want to touch on the reality of developing something like this and what it means for developers, what it means for operations, what it means for the planning stages, setting it up, building it, and then what it means for final deployment and observing your application after. That might be something we need to talk about as well.
And maintaining it, right? Even if you're not constantly developing it and you've got a nice stable application, it still needs a little bit of feeding, and there's still security concerns even if you're not making changes. There's CVEs maybe in something you used and you didn't even realize it because of the whole supply chain of this, what are they calling, the software bill of materials now. So we might even get to talk about that. I'm sure that'll be a fun topic.
Definitely. Well, I'm excited. Next time we get together, I want to focus on getting our planning tool in place so we know what we're doing, and then let's talk about some of the decisions we made moving forward, and show some examples, and maybe talk about some of the pitfalls we fell into immediately. I'm sure that will happen. All right.
Awesome.
Well, excited to talk with you again. Let's go get started on this.
All right. Sounds good.